Our economic model is at war with life on Earth. We can't change the laws of nature, but we can change our broken economy. And that's why climate change isn't just a disaster. It's also our best chance to demand and build a better world. Change or be changed?
Ze is een internationaal icoon geworden van de strijd tegen kapitalisme, klimaatverandering en ook globalisering. Haar nieuwste boek No Time is een hartekreet. Verander nu voor het klimaat zelf alles verandert. Dames en heren, de Canadese journaliste en activiste Naomi Klein. Mrs. Klein, thank you very much for spending some time with us because you're very busy this moment promoting your book.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. It's been an interesting discussion, too.
Yeah. You're doing lectures all over the world. You're giving interviews, chatting from time to time with your readers. Clearly, people are very concerned about climate change.
Yeah, I think it's really shifted. It took me 5 years to write this book. And for the first couple of years, I would say I'm writing a book about climate change, and people would be like, really? Nobody really cares about that anymore, you know? But then the week that my book came out in English, there were 400,000 people marching on the streets of New York City during the UN Climate Summit, demanding action from their political leaders, the biggest climate march in history. So it just goes to show that sometimes when we, all the experts claim that the public doesn't care about something, the public will surprise you. It turns out that we actually do care about our future and our home and the future for our kids.
Okay,
of course we care.
Yeah, but what is lacking at the moment is a sort, political sense of urgency. We talked about it earlier.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's so, it's been a long time since I've been in Europe, and it's really striking to me because before 2009, really leading up to the Copenhagen summit, the UN summit on climate change, there was really this sense that Europe was leading on climate. In fact, this was the only place that was really taking action. I'm from Canada. My country has a terrible climate record. Of course, the United States was lagging. But we all looked to Europe for leadership. And it's been so striking how the economic crisis has been really used to just wipe this issue off the map and claim that people care, but don't care. But when I talk to people, they still care. But it's just one of the many things that people are being asked to sacrifice in the name of this economic crisis, their job security, their pensions, their social programs, the planet itself. And, my hope is that maybe that will just be one thing too much and people will start standing up.
Ja, meneer Noels, dat is inderdaad gebeurd. We waren zo bezig met de economie, dat de rest in de verdrukking kwam. Maar u gelooft wel in de samenhang tussen de twee? Dat is
Ik denk dat de hoge olieprijzen meer hebben gedaan voor de verbetering van klimaat en voor heel veel investeringen die hebben geleid tot een vermindering van de uitstoot van broeikasgassen dan bijvoorbeeld Kopenhagen of Kyoto. En dus met andere woorden, als je de economie voor je wint, dan kan er veel veranderen. Dus ik deel uw analyse en uw bezorgdheid. Ik heb in 2008 een boek geschreven waar een van de 6 hoofdstukken ging over bezorgdheid over het klimaat. En dat staat nog altijd overeind. Maar ik denk dat we een verzoening moeten vinden, want als je de economie voor jou laat werken, dan zie je heel veel verbeteringen. Dus niet snel genoeg. Maar toch, ik denk dat in de afgelopen 5 jaar, niet tegenstaande de crisis, de switch zeker in Europa is gemaakt en is gebleven dat het klimaat zo belangrijk is. En ik denk dat daar wel een groot verschil is, dat in de Verenigde Staten men daar misschien minder zorgen over maakt, maar ook daar zie je dat bijvoorbeeld in Californië.
I don't think we should be complacent about this, and I think there is really a danger in being too self-congratulatory. I mean, where we are right now is nowhere that we need to be. I mean, we know this, and if we listen to climate scientists, what they say is that our global emissions need to be going down now by 6% a year if our governments are going to keep the promise that they made in Copenhagen in 2009, which was to keep warming below 2 degrees. So it's not, you know, we can point to, you know, this company's doing a good thing, this thing is working, but we have to look at the big picture. And the big picture is that emissions are going up, not down. They're going up year after year. And, you know, in Europe, you know, a country like this, to have so little of the energy system coming from renewables, you know, around 4%, it's shocking. The United States is the same, but we look at Germany, 25% of Germany's electricity is coming from renewables, so we know it's possible. It is possible to reconcile, but at the same time, Germany's emissions are still creeping upwards because they won't say no to the coal companies. So this is why in the book I say we have a conflict between the logic of neoliberalism, which tells politicians they can't regulate corporations, they can't strongly tax, they can't do the things you were talking about, close tax loopholes, really take that leadership role, because that conflicts with the ideology that has you know, gripped our elites. It took longer for it to take hold here, but you know, we had it earlier. But that's why we failed to deal with the climate crisis, because it takes economic planning of that kind. It takes going after the polluters, that kind of strong leadership.
Yeah, Mrs. Klein, because the original title of your book is, we call it here No Time, but it's This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. So the underlying idea is if we don't change capitalism as a system, we can't save nature.
Well, the point of saying it changes everything is that what climate scientists are telling us is that the road we're on leads to a future in which everything changes about our physical world. They tell us we're headed towards 4 to 6 degrees of warming. That is catastrophic. So in order to get to that place, all we have to do is nothing. Just keep on doing what we're doing. If we want to get off that road, we have to swerve because we've waited so long. So there's no scenario in which this gets to be non-radical. Either it's radical physical change or it's radical political and economic change. And that's hard for very reasonable people to accept, but that's where we're at.
You're looking at this.
I know,
but the paradox is that today, by far, the biggest polluter on earth is China, which is a communist regime. And you can say, okay, it's a hybrid model.
Yeah, I think
and how will you tackle that? So,
ik denk dat je met een ander probleem zit. De fossiele industrie, wij weten alle, we gaan van een fossiele industrie naar een technologisch innovatieve industrie. Wij zien dat in België heel goed. De auto-industrie verdwijnt zelfs bij ons al. Het aandeel van de fossiele industrie daalt. Maar ik denk wat je gaat krijgen is dat de fossiele industrieën, naarmate ze verdwijnen, zullen ze gaan naar de armere landen. Ze zullen op die manier de planeet verlaten. Kijk maar naar Californië, waar mensen zich kunnen permitteren om met hybrids en met Tesla's te rijden. Het begint dus ook in Europa, niet toevallig in Duitsland, met de rijkste landen hebben de mogelijkheid om dat te veranderen. En die kunnen de switch maken weg van de fossiele industrieën. Maar we zullen zien dat die natuurlijk via de achterpoort van de armere landen zullen verdwijnen, van de derde en de vierde wereld. Dat lijkt mij voorspelbaar. En dat is een groot probleem, want numeriek zijn die zeer belangrijk.
Well, we also have to be honest that we have outsourced our emissions to China. It's not just that China is producing these emissions for itself. When we look at China's emissions and all the pollution, that's going towards making our cars and making all the products in our homes. So just pointing the finger doesn't work. We're completely enmeshed in the system. And yet, China has set, just this week, in the past 2 weeks, they have promised to have 20% of their electricity come from renewable energy by 2030. That's a very bold target.
Yeah, and they made a sort of deal with President Obama.
So there is some good news.
You believe in it, that something will happen?
Well, look, I think anybody who's followed the climate negotiations, as I know you have, you know, it always descends into this battle between the U.S. and China, the two biggest emitters in the world, accusing each other of being the problem. So it's definitely good when those two parties are not at war with one another, but are saying we're going to work together. But from a scientific perspective, neither of the targets, for either country, is in line with what scientists are telling us we need to do. And so I think that means that we need to build political movements in all of our countries, and also that includes China. The reason why Chinese leaders are making these promises is because the Chinese people are organizing. We say, yes, it's not a democracy, but boy, do they take risks.
Yeah.
And people have been protesting because they can't send their kids to school without putting on a pollution mask. You see these images from China of these pollution masks, 6-year-old kids with, cartoon characters decorated, and it's just heartbreaking. And so in China, they're saying, if this is the cost of economic growth, maybe we should slow down.
Ja, meneer Noes, bent u het daarmee eens dat een soort van burgerprotest of activisme iets in beweging kan zetten, zoals het gebeurt stilaan in China af en toe?
Ja, in China zijn mensen geconfronteerd met al de problemen. Het water is vervuild, de lucht is vervuild en dergelijke meer. Ze klagen niet voor de CO2-emissies. Ze klagen omdat ze fysieke ongemakken hebben en dat is bij ons niet minder. En dus de gevolgen bij ons zullen met een heel grote vertraging komen. Er is een enorme inertie, een enorme vertraging. En de problemen bijvoorbeeld in de lage landen, u bent in de lowlands hier, bijvoorbeeld de stijging van de zeespiegel. Wij zitten nog altijd in het proces om onze bevolking te overtuigen dat dat een probleem gaat worden. En een beetje zoals men 20 of 30 jaar geleden zei dat roken niet zo erg was of asbest niet zo erg was, zitten we nog altijd in de fase dat we mensen moeten overtuigen dat er een probleem is. En zijn er heel veel klimaatnegationisten die zeggen het is niet zo erg, u overdrijft. Omdat we pas binnen 20 jaar hier aan de tafel kunnen zitten en zeggen, was het 2 graden of 6 graden en was het allemaal zo erg of niet? En dat maakt het heel moeilijk. Niemand wil solidair zijn met de volgende generatie en dat zien we op verschillende vlakken.
Ja. Mrs. Klein, you agree?
But it isn't just the next generation to show solidarity with. And I think people who have political platforms need to find their moral voice on this question, because humanity has acted in the face of profound moral crisis before. And when you have entire countries that are facing extinction, when you have whole peoples for whom this is an immediate human rights crisis right now, and we're sitting here wringing our hands going, is this a crisis? Maybe I'd like it if it's a little bit warmer. You know what? We need to actually ask ourselves, are we speaking about this with the moral urgency that this deserves? Because in sub-Saharan Africa, if you talk about 4 to 6 degrees warming, you're talking about wiping out entire peoples. And we need to talk about that with much stronger language than we talk about right now.
Mrs. Klein, when we're talking about next generations, when you started writing the book, you were rather pessimistic, in a bit gloomy mood, but in the meanwhile, your son was born.
Yes.
And that
I write about my son in the book.
Changed a lot, eh?
Well, I think for anyone with kids, there's this thing that happens, because when we talk about climate change, there's all these, we're going to cut emissions by X amount by 2030, this amount by 2050, and temperatures will go up this amount. And I think, when it's yourself, you're thinking, how old will I be then? But then when you have a little one, then you're thinking, how old will they be then? And you imagine their life playing out in these scenarios that are being described. But yeah, for me, as I was writing the book, I would read all of these very frightening scientific reports about melting Arctic ice and so on. But for me, what really brought it home was watching my son become so attached to animals that I knew were facing extinction. He loved this book when he was 1 year old about moose, and I would read it to him again and again. And it suddenly hit me, oh my God, I keep reading these articles about how the North American moose population is collapsing. Well, maybe he'll never see one. And that was the moment where I cried about climate change for the first time, because I thought about it, but it hadn't really pierced my heart, And I think we need that, and I wrote about that because I feel like there's a way in which we talk about climate change that's too clinical, and even all these numbers I've thrown out, 2030, 2 degrees, 6 degrees, and people's eyes glaze over, and it's like, you know what? We're human beings, and we're talking about our home, we're talking about our kids, and you should cry sometimes, so...
Ja, meneer Hertmans, ik zou u heftig beginnen knikken.
Het gaat voor mij ook over het feit dat we die hele industrie en de hele economie altijd hebben bekeken vanuit een 18e, 19e eeuwse groeimodel. Het moest maar groeien. En je ziet dat dat groeimodel failliet is. Dus zullen we een minder mechanisch groeimodel nodig hebben en een meer organisch systeem dat van binnenuit zichzelf vernieuwt. Want de ruimte is vol voor wat we met economie en industrie op deze planeet kunnen doen. Dus de vernieuwingen zullen als het ware van binnenuit een totaal andere logica moeten vinden. En dat is eigenlijk een heel spannende switch die we op globaal, cultureel, economisch, maatschappelijk vlak meemaken. En dat vraagt volgens mij heel veel verandering van de geesten.
Yeah.
Om dat mechanische beeld te lossen en naar een organisch model te gaan.
Yeah, and this is happening, a change of mind right now?
Yeah, I think it is happening, and I think the European voice is really important. You know, I'm North American. I live in Canada, and you know, these countries, these so-called new countries, are particularly conflicted about climate change. You look at who the worst climate criminals are: Canada, Australia, you know, the U.S.
Avoid China because, in my view, they are the biggest climate criminal at this moment.
Well, they are the highest emitter, but they actually are doing more about it than Canada or Australia. This is a developing country with millions of people in poverty, so they have more of a right to atmospheric space than the rest of us.
That's a bit the error to say that they have a historic right to pollute, because we have polluted in the past. Their technology is much more advanced now,
Well, then
and so they can benefit from it too.
And they are. They have better renewable energy technologies than
so that's the
Belgium.
Problem.
China spent more on green tech last year than the entire European Union combined. That is a scandal. Okay, look, I'm not letting China off the hook, but to just play the beat up on China game, I feel that it's been enough at this point. And what I'm saying is, like, this idea of the infinite frontier, it's a particular problem in countries that, you know, have this frontier ethos really built in, that are such large countries. And we are changing, but in my country, a lot of the change is happening through a dialogue with indigenous people who are challenging that frontier idea that runs so deep, the idea that our countries are so huge. You know, we were founded by Europeans. We're like, it's getting crowded here. Let's go where there's endless nature, you know. That's been a really dangerous idea, and we need that leadership from European countries who understand, it's not infinite.
Okay, a new role for European countries, who knows? Mrs. Klein, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.